Okay, we're good. Rightio, we'll get underway, everyone. Thank you. So, welcome to this meeting of the Regulatory Committee. Apologies from Councillor Noon, Councillor Hope.
And Forbes is going to be 20 minutes late, Alexa. So
Alexa Forbes for lateness, and Michael Laws. Okay, can someone move that we accept? Kate, thank you. Seconder to that, Hillary. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? It's carried. Thank you.
Would we just differentiate though? I think it's important that 2 of them are on council, or 3 of them are on council business.
I
No.
don't think so.
Okay. I think something we should consider doing one day.
Right. We
I
may
might
have.
be ill or something, and that's not any better or worse than them being on council.
Well, also there's probably a privacy component that you need to observe.
Okay. Thank you. We'll move on. Attendance. We have Richard and team, and executive in attendance. Do you want to introduce your team, please, Richard?
So, Tammy Sargent, our compliance manager, who will be leading the first paper. Simon Wilson and Joe will be here. Steve is an apology today. He's in Auckland doing an oil spill response course. So, yeah, I'm happy to be handing things over now.
that's Steve is a Harbour Master person.
Correct.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
That's Steve.
Thank you. Confirmation of agenda. We're all happy there. Conflicts of interest. Need to be mindful. We've got no public forum. And we will move to confirmation of minutes. So I'm sure everyone takes as a true and accurate record. Hillary, you're going to move that?
I am.
Thank you. Have we a seconder? Kate, thank you. No discussion. Okay, I'll put it. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Actions, status of committee resolutions. Do we need to make any mention there? I think, Richard, we're happy?
No, only that the first action is obviously the first paper today.
Yep.
And the second action is something we will just continue those emails that I send out. They're either weekly or fortnightly, depending on changes in the data, including any decisions, and noting Hillary's request that anything we provide to the ministry is provided, and that's fine. That's the way we've been doing that.
Great. No, and that's appreciated. Thank you. They're very
It's hardly
useful.
overdue though, is it?
No, I might.
Oh, it's just the way the system works. It's, yeah. Liz keeping us in line.
Okay.
We want to say with those actions that we're dealing with them by different reporting things, rather than implying that there isn't any actions being watched over, or that there is and we haven't been having them reported.
Well, I think we could probably just close them off as completed.
I'll just mark this complete. Yeah, just so as it doesn't look like somebody hasn't done what we wanted them to.
Perfect.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Right. We'll move to first paper, compliance plan, and basically, team, if you any comments you'd like to make, and then we'll open it for questions and discussion.
Thank you. Through the Chair, the Regulatory Committee considered the Regional Sector Strategic Compliance Framework at its meeting in March, and at that meeting it was noted that a compliance plan would be prepared and consistent with the principles of that framework, and this is that compliance plan. Look, developing this compliance plan has been critical for us to understand our workload pressures, particularly with new freshwater national environment standards coming in, and to prioritise our compliance monitoring and enforcement activities accordingly. In an ideal world, we would develop a compliance policy first. But however, it's been critical that we've developed this compliance plan now, and we're proposing to present a compliance policy in early next year. And if we need to, we can update this compliance plan and also our operational compliance program to be consistent with any council direction through that policy.
Great. Thank you.
Happy to take questions.
Okay. Great. We'll just move to questions first. Councillor Robertson.
Okay, thank you. First question is that the approach is for 18 months. Why did we choose 18 months? And the other one, it looks great and risk-based, I've got that. And we've come up with our priorities there, which I've seen as well. but maybe you could elaborate on how the process for coming to those priorities, how the risk-based approach sort of worked to come to what those priorities were. We as councillors always like to see what the policies are behind something and just how they were derived at. They look good at face value, but just what's the substance behind it?
Thank you. Through the chair. So to answer those questions, in terms of how we prioritised based on risk, for each type of activity, we considered the impact of that activity on public health and environmental impacts, but also the likelihood of that, and then that lands somewhere on a framework. This is consistent with standard practice in terms of that regional sector strategic compliance framework. So we used that as a base, but also considered other factors in terms of history of non-compliance, significance of those potential effects, and other matters such as state of environment, data reporting that's available in terms of identifying where those what those priorities for compliance were. In terms of the time frame, it was just good to do this for 18 months in the first instance, but that would help us inform or support the LTP in terms of our work programming. But of course, we can update this compliance plan and the operational work program in accordance with any council direction.
Only one thing to add. I think the 18 months too is obviously with the essential freshwater package, it will significantly change how we operate in the compliance space, particularly in the rural sector with farming consents that we haven't had to do previously. So it'll just give us a period of time to watch how that plays out, and then we can update our planning. So it's that'll be happening from the middle of next year on, which will give us a full 12-month cycle, and then look to refresh it at that point.
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you, Councillor Wilson.
A pedantry problem, just a word change, sorry, Tammy. Page 6, under infringement notice, could we change the word fine to fee, please, which I think is how it's dealt with in the Act?
Yes, we can correct that.
Thank you. It is important because the fine has a very different
Great, thank you. Councillor Scott.
feeling.
Yeah, and I got it. I've actually got 3 questions. Hope that's okay. The first one, I think, is probably straightforward. But I see there, in terms of you've listed the total consents in our system, not necessarily the ones that are monitored. Whereas with dairy farms, you've said there's 268 dairy farms monitored. Is that the actual where you physically went on the farm? Because it's obviously risk-based, but there's something like 500 dairy farms. I mean, you must monitor them all at some point. Yeah?
Yes, through the chair, yes. So the difference there is currently dairy farms is a permitted activity. So, and you're correct, we prioritise which dairy farms we monitor each year.
Yeah.
Based on
So
risk
you
factors.
actually went to 268. Yeah.
Last year.
Last year. Yeah. Okay, no, that's fine. Thank you. Second question through the chair is, as a matter of interest, what percentage, or maybe not a percentage, but there must be a certain amount of information that you can take relatively live. Yeah, like, so for example, so I'm looking at, am I on the right report? Your principles in terms of transparency, your principles in terms of timeliness and effectiveness. And, it does take us a while to do things. So, for example, our wastewater plants, the community's thinking, wonder how the wastewater plant is performing. And that, it seems to me, hasn't always been done in a timely way. But my question is, how much of that information can actually go almost straight live to our website? Now, obviously, in terms of, an inspection, how's it look, and there's certain things that a person has to rock up. But philosophically, because this is what we're talking about, principles and plans, I mean, how much of that wastewater compliance assessment can just go live?
Welcome, Alexa.
To our website, that the the nitrogen level was this, the nitrogen was, because that I assume is supplied by the TA.
Yeah, so most wastewater treatment plants have a monthly reporting requirement to them. And that probably comes back to the last workshop we've done, where we will house that information in Aquarius, and how we display that becomes a sort of Aquarius phase 2 or phase 3, but Aquarius will give us the building blocks
Yeah, no, fair
and the
enough.
ability to share it.
Well, my question is, why doesn't it just go straight to our first principle we list is transparency. And why doesn't it just go straight to the website? I mean, they provided it. If there's a mistake, well, it's their responsibility. The community says, actually, the wastewater plant seems to be going okay, or actually, the wastewater plant doesn't seem to be going okay. Because you just think of the environmental degradation that occurs in the time period from, and I won't list any examples, but from when things start to go downhill.
So look, I think again we've had a few discussions, and I think that principle of transparency as an organisation to the community has come through loud and clear. What I would say in terms of us receiving reports and making them public is, I think, in order to allow our staff the time to do their jobs, it's important that we have a period of time where we can do an assessment of compliance against the consent and determine what, if any, actions required, rather than have a trial by public and trial by social media. If those reports were just immediately made public, there is a role there for the staff to be given the space.
I'm not talking about the whole report. I'm talking about some key data.
Yep. So that that comes back to exactly what Simon said, and I think that as a principle we've heard that, and there is nothing preventing us from having compliance dashboards or key data for specific areas available to the public in the future once we have the infrastructure to enable us to do that.
Yeah. Okay, that's fair enough answer, because it seems to me in a mature phase that's where we would be, because if we go on to the La or whatever, we're quite prepared to see that the water, you can't go swimming, whereas for some reason, it's a community asset.
Yeah, look, I don't disagree. I think that's there's no all of the information we receive as part of compliance is discoverable, so there's no reason we wouldn't make it public anyway if we were comfortable, we had the tools to do it and we had the resources to do it, because it would generate questions and other things that we would need to have staff to follow up on. But as a general principle, I wouldn't have any issues with that, Brian.
Okay, thank you. And my final question, if I may, is to do with all the good work that's going on with you and your team out in the community for this, the consents for farms and that are required, whether it's winter grazing or whatever. And just so it's clear in my head, will those consents, in terms of, because there's also a shadow of potentially farm plans at some point as well, so if I was a farmer, when exactly will I need those consents by? What is that date?
So we're getting probably into the third paper. Can we hold that question?
Yeah.
Is that all right? And keep this on a compliance plan, but that's a very relevant question for the last paper.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Marion.
Thank you. Two questions. The first one is to do with your compliance monitoring principles, and down there is 5, it's air discharges, reduce the non-compliant air discharges. My problem here is that, as I understand it, compliance in this issue is very much dependent on people complaining, particularly when we're talking about domestic fire appliances. The two that I'm aware of are distinctly from people complaining, and that kind of, in a way, distorts, doesn't it? It's a neighbour complaining about the house beside them or the factory down the road. It's not necessarily done by measurements, because the air shares we measure, that's there, but the individual person burning something revolting in their house that affects you next door, how the hell? So what I'm trying to say is there's a hit and miss occurs with this because it's complaint based. Sorry, and I'm worried about it.
Thank you. Through the chair. Currently, our approach is primarily reactive in this space.
Yeah.
It is question around resourcing in terms of being more proactive in the air discharges. So currently, this plan is based on current resources and prioritising our compliance monitoring and enforcement activities within the current resourcing that we have.
It is something that, Ms. Jen, I will want to keep an eye on in a sense, because it's luck of the miss. I mean, I still have the memory of standing outside the coal-burning heater for Avonside Girls High and looking up at the discharge into the Christchurch sky and saying, shit, who's responsible for checking on that? Not knowing.
Yeah.
Not even knowing how to complain.
Yeah, we're probably getting into this afternoon's conversation a little bit, because I mean, as a general principle, when you can look at the numbers in these reports, we can't get to everything proactively. So it's not just air where there's an element of luck of the draw. It could be anything. Yeah. And there's a decision to be made by this council in terms of the resource provided and the level of proactive monitoring that can occur with that resource, and that's where the risk discussion comes in.
Okay, that's all right. So the second question is on page 10, Marion. Second question was to do with, I was looking at all the things about intensive farming and farm effluent management and things like that, and I put, you apply up here, apply a proactive education first approach. In any of these, all these different things that were listed here, does education first mean you do not prosecute on the first mistake?
Through the chair, no, it doesn't mean that we don't prosecute necessarily. It means...
Or whatever of those words, because there's steps in them, aren't there? I understand that.
Yes, so the intent of that is that when we are going out on farms, that we will allocate additional time to educate farmers on the new requirements. So education first. However, in any given circumstance, we'll take appropriate action if non-compliance is identified.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Marion. Hilary.
Partly to follow up from both those two questions, it seems to me that where we would be aiming for...
Microphone.
Sorry. Yep. Is that working? No. Is that working?
Yep. Thank you.
Where we'd be aiming for isn't necessarily to put something up immediately we get the first bit of information, because it might not be right. I mean, we were talking during the break about how from time to time the information we receive might be wrong. It might have a spike that doesn't belong there, or there's a reason for whatever it is. And if we tried to get it up, and I think you were sort of touching on it, if we try to get that up immediately so as that people can see, it might not be really sort of either accurate or fair, because people haven't had a chance to say, here, Bear, but the reason why it looks like I haven't done such and such is because, you know, there was an earthquake and my telemetry broke down, or I mean, I don't know. But the combination of that and the complaints-based, because if we do risk-based and complaints-based, we also have, I'd like to see a policy or to see what policy we're doing to produce some of these things, so what people can expect from them. And so if, for instance, we end up with a policy or a procedure guidance manual or whatever it is, I'd quite like to see what we're aiming for, and I would expect it to say something like, we will try and get these up once Aquarius is doing what it should. After we have confirmed if there's something odd, that it's reasonable, so as we don't put it up knowing that there's something odd about it and it might not be right. And also the complaints, if we're doing them on the basis of complaints, people think that they can make an anonymous complaint, and I don't know whether we tell them that they can, but of course if you prosecute, that complaint ceases to be anonymous. And so I would expect that guidance or procedure manual or whatever it is to make clear to people that although they can make anonymous complaints. They can't. The minute we choose, and we can choose to prosecute, it stops being anonymous. So just not to put out something that gives people the idea that they can make anonymous complaints all over the place. So anyway, all I'd like to see whether there's being developed or whether we already have some manual that sort of gives what we can expect as our attitude towards these sorts of. Sorry, is that a? We probably already have one.
Look, I think there's varying bits of information currently being pulled together by Tammy and the team to form more of a holistic operating manual. And some of the things that you mentioned will be in there. And, you know, to what degree that is a, you know, public practice manual versus the way we operate. You know, some of those things, the complainants do have a right to privacy. And one of the considerations in terms of enforcement action about whether we go to court is the conversation we have with the complainant about their willingness to become a witness to any action we take, because that can be the strength of your case or not. So all of those things will come into it and form part of the practice manuals and how we do our work. So it's being developed.
We could see it at some point. Yep. That would be fabulous.
Great. Thanks, Hilary. Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. I think Tammy and Richard in their responses to Marion covered quite a bit of what I wanted to say. But the first thing I want to say is this final draft compliance plan, I think, is first rate. It's a very good document. It's clear. It's easy to read. And I, as a citizen, can see what the position and the stance of ORC is in terms of compliance. I think for a lot of people, it's a bit of a mysterious issue. The word compliance suggests that we have a little army of folks with sticks who are going to go around and belt people who do the wrong thing in environmental terms. And when you read this, the most recurrent word is proactive. And it's used a lot right through this plan, and Tammy and Richard both used the word as well. But that suggests that we are capable of actually working with our consent holders and our residents and our land users on the front foot, being out there, trying to stop non-compliance before it happens. Now, Tammy suggested there's a resourcing issue there, and I'd like to get my head around that a bit more and hear more from Tammy and Richard about where we're at in terms of the capability to be as proactive as this plan repetitively says we're going to be. Now, maybe that's an LTP discussion, but I'd like to know a snapshot of today, how capable we are of being genuinely proactive with the thousands of consent holders and consumers and land users out there who rely on us to be an enforcement agency.
Yeah.
And if we're going to do it with a proactive educational approach, what's our capability for doing that right now in terms of, on a scale of 1 to 10, are we a 3? Are we a 9? Are we a 10? I don't know. I've got a suspicion that we're probably fairly low down that scale. But I'd like to hear from Richard and Tammy about how genuinely proactive we can be with the resources we've got right now.
Absolutely. Go for it, team.
Thank you. Through the chair, currently I'd say as this stands, this plan I would say is ambitious, but it is also achievable for our team. Where we are on that track of moving more towards proactive than reactive, we're on the journey. I would say currently there is opportunity for us to be more proactive and more efficient with how we currently do our compliance activities. And this is what this plan will really set the framework for that. with the teams, and the operational compliance program will be in effect how we deliver on this plan at a team, project and individual level.
Yeah, I think that the other thing underpinning that, Michael, is that we've got a lot of work to do to change the way in which the community are prepared to engage with us as a compliance team. So that's one of the big messages we've been driving through the community meetings we've been holding, is we have been more of a stick approach in the past. So, we need to be encouraging them to be on the front foot and contacting us with questions or concerns so we can be working with them. And that's not an easy switch to make. That's something that's going to take a bit of time.
That's a really good point, Richard.
So it is, when Tammy refers to a journey, it is a little bit like that. We've got to get some confidence and trust from the community that we're there to work with them, because ultimately it comes back to what we're trying to achieve, which is mitigating environmental effects. It's easier for us to do that before they happen than it is after the fact. So that's the principles in terms of the way the compliance unit works. And obviously there is an incident pollution response arm of that, which we will always need. But fundamentally, that proactive piece also relies on consent holders being willing to be transparent because they trust it's a fair process. So there's a little bit of work for us to continue to do there.
Just to follow up to that, and it's probably a question to Sarah, but is this compliance plan therefore a whole of organisation plan? Because I'm thinking that the people who report to Richard and Tammy, and whose job is compliance, they're a very small proportion of the workforce of ORC. And yet we've got people out there, whether they be scientists, rural liaison team, comm staff, whoever. I'm guessing that they are seen by the ELT as all part of this approach. It's such a good approach. I want to see it work. But I've got a suspicion it won't work unless the whole of ORC takes it on.
Okay, so I'll answer from a broad perspective and then I'll get Richard to cover off anything that I have missed. The way that I think about ORC is we're a team, and as a consequence of that, we all have different jobs, but I have an expectation, which we're starting to bed down, but it's transitional, that, if you have someone up your driveway, it doesn't matter whether they're a biodiversity person or whether they're an engineer from our river team or whatever, they have enough knowledge and information to be able to say, hey, do you realise there's a regulation about that and that might need a bit of a tidy up? Or, hey, would you like some advice about X? Or, did you realise that, you've got to get your rabbits under control? So from that sort of broad perspective, that's what I'd like to see happen. I don't want to be that organisation where we have, 5 ORC vehicles up one driveway in 1 week because we siloed and we're all doing our own individual thing. Also, making sure that we've got the connections. So, they might not have a deep knowledge, but they'll say, hey, I'll talk to compliance and see if they can give you some assistance or education or whatever the case may be. In terms of sort of compliance in a really pure nature, obviously there are some legal requirements, so we need to have warranted officers. Not all of our staff are warranted, and that's where your next level of knowledge and application, I guess, comes in. And so those people are more specialised. Now, at the moment, we have compliance staff, but we do have other officers who also hold warrants out of pure necessity, because we just can't be everywhere all at once. And so sometimes it does mean that you will have a biosecurity officer with a warrant, an RMA warrant, who will attend an incident, for example. So that's kind of my vision for how we evolve, and we're starting to transition that way. Rural liaison, of course, have a role in that. But Richard, is there anything you want to sort of add?
That covers it well. So the plan which Tammy's developed with the team has been shared with the other parts of the organisation who have a compliance function. So Andrea with biosecurity and rural liaison who are integral to this as well. So they're aware of this approach, and we've shared that. Yeah.
That's perfect, Sarah. Good answer. And Tammy, well-written report. I like this. I'm going to support it.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Kevin?
I'm good.
You're all good?
Yeah, answered. Thank you.
Excellent. Kate?
I share those views. I think it's great. There is a issue, though, that it is, I think, a change to an extent with the approach. Is that correct? In the past, there wasn't as proactive. There may have been people that got, on the first instance, any of those treatments, potentially.
Yeah, look, I can't speak in great detail what's improved. So I don't necessarily think there's fundamental changes. So when we say education first, if there's been negligence and poor management displayed, then we'll take the action that's required in that sense. But I suppose we are looking to get ahead of that by encouraging people to engage with us. That's really what we're looking for, and that should prevent those instances in most cases.
And what I'm looking at is it is progression and through, but some people, with all respect, and I know some have been done in the past actually who wouldn't have been done under this current policy, and it's whether they have a clean slate if they haven't been caught on for 2 or 3 years, is actually, because that is the problem. I do think that there was a fairly hit and miss in the past what may have got done.
I don't think, I certainly wouldn't be comfortable giving a general response to that. It's a case-by-case issue when staff come across it, and that's where, having a range of staff look at any issue in terms of Tammy's leadership team and herself, and then myself, Sarah, our legal team, to make sure we're right at making the decision that's fit for that individual case.
Okay. I think it's really important to understand that compliance, there's a bit of theory behind it. It's called the Braithwaite triangle. But basically, you have levels of compliance, and the most part you should be doing is more of that education, helping those people who want to comply, that kind of thing. And the least part you want to do is that really tip of the triangle, which is the enforcement piece. Whether that's had the right balance in the past, as I think the question you're asking. And I'm certainly not going to criticise, because I think that our staff have made the judgments that they've been able to make and empowered to make at the time. So I think, we certainly are not suggesting that somebody who is demonstrating gross negligence is going to be hit with education, because at the end of the day, we still have to meet our obligations for the environment. So chances are that wouldn't be the first step we would take. That said, if you have someone who wants to comply but is looking for some assistance in order to understand how to do that, then that's where the education piece comes in. So I think, we've got a range of tools and options available to us. The staff will always need to evaluate the circumstance and the individual case in which they're faced with, so that they can determine the best way forward.
Sorry.
I like where it's all going, and I think maybe that what Kate was referring to was consistency has not always been the major feature. I'm wanting to know a wee bit more about, I like the idea of not having 5 people up at somebody's driveway. Having said that, if you say, as we will be doing a bit of, could you come out to my farm and talk to me about a water permit or a winter grazing issue or something, and we go out there and that person is a warranted officer, as it happens, they haven't got a warrant particularly on their person, but they might have from time to time. They turn up there and then they think, goodness me, there's a lot of rabbits about here. And they might be wanting to be very compliant about winter grazing, but they might just have a bee in their bonnet about rabbits. Do we then go back home and say, right, those rabbits, I mean, you won't necessarily want to invite one of our people on to give you an answer about something if you think they're going to ping you for something completely unrelated, and that you hadn't allowed them onto your property to ping them about the rabbits.
I think that I think the principle, rather than one staff member being able to deal with everything, is that there is enough knowledge, general knowledge, right across our staff to provide that general advice, but where it's necessary, refer to the appropriate staff member who is responsible for that area of the business. So in that instance you're describing, if it was a compliance officer there to talk about winter grazing, they're not going to go into detail on enforcement action under rabbits. They may have a general conversation, because we would like our staff to be aware in a general level of our whole business, but they would go back and refer back to the appropriate team to follow up with that landowner and have a more detailed conversation. So it's still staff understanding and having expertise within the business that will deal with those things. But I think we have opportunities, if we give staff broad knowledge, just to be passing some of those key things on and being able to recognise things when they are out on site and add some additional value.
Does that staff member then become the complainant about the rabbits?
No, because it's not a complaint. It's a proactive visit from council in that instance that says so. It doesn't need to be seen as a complaint or not a complaint. The fact
But it is when they go back to the office and say, "Oh, go back out and have a look at them. Look at all their rabbits." To the next person.
It's really difficult, because in my view,
there's no good answer.
Yeah. In my view, staff aren't doing their job properly if they turn a blind eye to things that aren't appropriate. So I know, for example, that, staff who don't have a compliance role, so say, rural liaison staff in the past have said, farmers aren't going to let me up the driveway if they think that I'm going to, dob them in about their rabbits or their whatever. And I think we have to develop the trust we have between ourselves and the community, so that our staff can be seen as having the skills and expertise to be able to go and assist where they can. But also, if we're clear and consistent about how we undertake compliance, then everyone will know that if you're not doing the right thing, and if there is a significant problem, then you're likely to get a second visit. So I think it's about the way you do it, rather than the situation we've had in the past, where I know that, for example, staff have been on a property for another matter, they might have seen something, and I know from talking to staff that nothing to see here. I don't think that's satisfactory. I think we do need to work as a team, which is, actually I saw something and I'm not too sure that it's the right thing. Can you go and check it out? But if we're consistent in the way that we approach things, if we develop that relationship of trust so that we're very clear about what we do and when we do it and how we do it, then my hope is that we can work with the community and have a better understanding of all the roles we play.
So just sort of trying to tease out if we're going to properties either because there's a risk, or as a response to complaints. In this case, we'd be going back to them because it's a complaint, and a complaint has been from our staff. That's effectively what it is. And usually, presumably, what happens is, hey, mate, presumably, hey, you probably need to address those rabbits and things. But in the event if we go back there, and we haven't gone back there because generally those sorts of properties are a risk and we're doing all those properties this year, then we're going back as a result of a complaint, which, as it happens, is our staff member. Sort of.
See, I suppose I don't necessarily. I wouldn't put it in the complaints category necessarily. I see it more as staff end up on properties for a variety of reasons. There are tons of reasons why you might end up there, and they are obligated as an officer of the council to make sure that we meet our obligations as a council to the environment, in my view. That's what we all sign up to. There's a code of conduct around not bringing the organisation into disrepute and a whole lot of other stuff. And in my view, that's not a complaint. It's actually just part of their job. So I wouldn't be putting it in a complaint box at all. I wouldn't be saying so-and-so complained about such and such. I'd be saying a council officer attended a property, as a consequence identified an issue and passed that on to the appropriate other part of council.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then the way that's then responded to would be consistent with how we respond to non-compliance, that table that's on page 19. So that's where you start talking about, is Michael's question around, is this a consistent compliance approach, whether it's consent monitoring or biosecurity or whatever it might be. That's the way that it would be approached on site.
Okay, we'll keep moving. Marion and then Gretchen.
Thanks. Look, this is about the trust thing. Okay, I was invited out to a farm, and I'm not going to acknowledge who it was, but it was a political visit. And the farmer concerned took me down to a subsidence, if you like, in the land, and said that he'd had a number of ORC staff out there, and they could define whatever it was in terms of the legislation.
Critical source area, was it?
It might have been something like that. I'm sorry, I can't remember. But the problem is this. What he was saying was ORC doesn't know what it's talking about. They can't make a definition. And there goes the whole trust thing. And in a way, it's a game, but how are we winning this game? Do you see what I mean? Because I think it's been very rife out there.
I think that issue comes back to giving our staff the mandate to go out and make decisions on site, and the trust that they will then be supported by team leaders, managers, executives, CE and counsellors, because they're making those decisions based on the training and experience and advice they're receiving. They're making them for the right reasons and they stand by those decisions.
And if the person disputes it?
Well, then there's a conversation to be had about that. I think what we've heard on those sessions we've been running a lot is that we quite often don't give an answer. Our answer is this or that, and you need to make a decision. Then we'll come along and decide whether it was the right decision, and that's not helpful. So we need to be saying, this is our position on this. That absolutely there can be a dispute on that position. That's just a healthy conversation you need to have. But we at least need to give our staff the mandate to commit to a position, because it's when it falls into that grey area that people start losing trust. Because if we can't commit to something, and then we come along after the fact and they've made their decision and we say that was the wrong one, that breaks down pretty quickly.
It just becomes game playing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I think the other side of trust too is that what I've heard on multiple occasions from catchment groups is, trust also comes from taking a hard line with those bottom 10% of laggards who are not doing the right thing.
Yeah.
So it's as much about what we do as what we don't do, I guess, and we have to get that right as well.
Thanks, Steve.
So the expectations need to be, sorry.
That's right, Gretchen and then Alexa.
No, I've got nothing to say.
Yeah, just, excuse me, thank you, Mr. Chair. With your agreement, I'd like to move the recommendations, particularly endorsing the Regional Council's compliance plan, but all of the recommendations. And it's exciting to be at this point, if I could speak to that really briefly now. Trust is about trust within the whole of the community. So acting with transparency and using best practice, which is what you've evidenced here, with industry best practice, which has been established in New Zealand, and we are in line with that. Transparency of what our priorities are will be a huge step forward in our compliance approach in the ORC. And I think trust will come from whole of community, as I said, whether you are the person that is being visited by the compliance officer for education or for those 1% or whatever they are that are needing follow-up enforcement type action, and the wider community that benefits from all of that range of approach. So thank you for the leadership that's gone into developing the compliance plan, and really looking forward to seeing it in action, and I imagine a little bit iterative over the next 18 months. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we have recommendations 1 to 5 of what I think is a really positive report. Councillor Wilson, you're going to second that. Do you wish to speak to?
I want to reflect back on, as frustrated as some of us may be about the rule changes that are going on at the moment, the work that the team has done it's been an opportunity for people like Joe and Richard and the team to be out there building that very trust that we need for this. And at every meeting I've been, reflecting on the words that Brian said earlier, it is thanks to that staff building that right now, and it's been a fantastic trust building exercise and reputational improvement, I think, for the ORC generally out in the field. They've been engaging with people that generally haven't had to be engaged with the ORC, and they've done, and I think they work really well together, this report and building that trust together. So that's what I want to reflect on and say thank you.
Great, thank you. So is there any more discussion? Councillor Forbes.
I just wanted to say thank you to that. I really like the plan and the approach. Completely agree. I think key to it is empowering our staff so that they can, so that we've made positions, we have positions, we know what they are, we've communicated them well, and our staff are empowered to put that across, and that's what will make this work. And of course, that relies on trust, but I'm very happy with the plan.
Okay, great, thank you. Right, we're all done. I'm going to put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? It's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Richard and team. Right, we'll move on to item 9, matters for noting. We've got our quarterly regulatory activity report. I'm sure we can take the report as read. And Richard, any comments? Right, we'll throw it open for questions and discussion.
Happy to move,
Yeah.
but I've got an amendment.
Right, you've got an amendment?
I've got a third part.
So you're looking for an amendment to the recommendations?
Yeah, we received the report. We note the report with thanks. It's a great report, very clear, and hence no questions. And the third part is, because we're talking about monitoring and it's something I think we need to do. Have you got the words here, Liz? Yes. Thank you.
I've suggested it.
Oh, yeah.
That the chair and CEO actively pursue with central government better cellular coverage in Otago to ensure staff and residents can fully engage in online data monitoring and information opportunities and requirements.
Could you add in there to central government and LGNZ? Actively pursue, I think, includes lobbying, but I mean, I hate the word lobbying. It's but or Libby as well. But if you put local government New Zealand in there, I think they can do that actively for our part. This comes down to the questions that the consent requirements that are coming in require us to telemetry, and if you can't do it, it is really problematic. I think on top of that, we've got staff who need to be out in the field being able to do things in the same time. And if they can't be doing that, and the Catlins is absolutely fraught, but I know there's areas all over Otago where you can't get cellular networks coverage. We need to be doing better, and we need to be provided better services so that we can be part of this real world in monitoring and in consent and compliance.
Okay, thank you. So that's number 3. So you've moved that.
And all of them. I'll move all of them.
Second that.
Right, and Hilary, you're seconding that. Do you want to speak to it?
Just briefly, is there, and this is sort of partially a question, is there an ability at the moment to have an alternative? Or, I mean, we are obliged to require that. Is there, if somebody just says, I do not have coverage, I cannot do that, have we got the ability to do anything?
Yeah, so I guess there's two parts of an answer to that. One is there are other options other than cell phone coverage, but it comes down to a cost implication on the person's cell phone coverage is by far the cheapest way of doing telemetry or internet access. And secondly, there is an ability to apply for an exemption to the telemetry requirements, but under the regulations, that's an annual application, so they'd have to reapply each year. So it's a significant overhead on the consent order.
I just wanted to know.
Yeah.
I just want to talk to the report.
Okay, so we'll deal with the amendment first and then move to questions and discussion on the
I
report.
don't see it as amendments.
It's not an amendment because it wasn't a resolution.
Extra
Right,
recommendation.
but we're adding it to the recommendations.
Yes,
It's an
The
extra
motion on the
one.
floor is all three.
Right,
including the extra, yeah.
okay. So then we will move to general discussion. So Brian?
Yeah, I just want to refer to maybe get a bit of an update in terms of plan change 7, in terms of the timing, because it's referred to here in the report, page 56. What it actually says on paragraph 21, applications have been lodged during the reporting period for water permits under plan change 7, specifically seeking a consent term of 6 years. But actually, when I skim forward, I think page 68, what it says is that a further 83 deemed permits currently have applications underway to replace them with 48 resource consents. Applicants have applied for 1 consent with a term of 6 years or less, 0 consents between 6 and 15, and 42 consents with a term of more than 15 years. So obviously out in the community, people, landowners, in the main are going for the 42, and the consideration is between the existing operational plan and the PC7 once it's adopted. So is there any comment in terms of, like, when is PC7 expected to be adopted?
I'm not too sure, sorry, when the hearing date has been set for that at the EPA and the Environment Court. So, yeah.
We don't know.
We can find out for you.
Yeah.
We know you will receive the key issues reports.
Anita sent them.
That Anita sent. So there will be, usually those reports are done quite early in the process, and evidence exchange, I'm imagining, will be a little further along. My latest understanding was either end of the year or beginning of next year for the hearing, but we might be able to confirm that.
Okay. And between now and then, there's 42 consents have been applied for. How many of them roughly are expected to be heard prior to that date?
I'm not too sure, sorry. It depends on the specific situation that each of those applications are in, i.e. the stage of the consent process. So some of them could be heard before then, but others may not, in terms of information requirements or, discussions with affected parties.
And is there any comment from staff just in terms of how it's all tracking? Nothing other than the report? No,
nothing additional. I think there is a growing awareness of Plan Change 7 and how it relates to the term for these applications. We've had a few hearings through, and we have had more inquiries around what would be needed in terms of applying for a 6-year permit, which is great.
Okay, thank you.
I think we'll just note too that for any Plan Change 7 questions, Kate's chair was back from the table and I was just acting in a sharing capacity only.
Ours is not a deemed permit, so it isn't really in there, but it's in that mix as in available for that.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions or discussion? All right. We have 3 recommendations, 2 and the new one, and they have been moved and seconded.
Sorry.
All right. Are we happy to put those? Okay, put those. All in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? It's carried. Thank you. And next, last paper is update on implementation of NESFW and PC8. Basically, we'll take it as paper is read. Richard, in your hands.
Yeah, look, it's just an opportunity update, I guess, on the work that's happening, given it's moving quite fast. So happy to take any specific questions. And Brian had one before and I've forgotten it, but he can re-ask it because now's the right time.
Go for it, Brian.
Okay, thank you. Well, firstly, 2 points. A big thank you. I've attended quite a few of the meetings with the community, and I think staff are doing a wonderful job. So thank you to Richard and his team and Sarah and so forth. In that vein, I refer to paragraph 30, where it says that their GM regulatory is on the Freshwater Implementation Directors Group, and their consent managers, the contact person for the Freshwater Implementation Group, and the compliance manager involved in national discussion. So it's good that we're not there by ourselves, where there'll be a bit of an iterative process going on. And so, that's great. And my question really is in terms of the reality on the ground. So we're communicating and we're talking about doing the consenting process. We're staffing up. But myself as one councillor, I'm actually looking a step further and hoping that farm plans are going to be here sooner rather than later. And so that traffic jam in the middle, what are the key dates that you're aiming for? And maybe how would farm plans dovetail, into consents? And yeah, bit of a feedback loop in terms of some of the key issues.
So I'll just talk briefly about the consent part, and then Richard will talk about the farm plan part. So some of the regulations apply now in terms of needing a consent. So that's from the 3rd of September. So that's if it's a new activity that they haven't done before.
Okay.
Some of them have a date written into it from which they would need that consent. So we're looking at your nitrogen, fertiliser, and a few other regulations. Intensive winter grazing is in there as well. So it's from May next year. For ones where there's a date and they're already doing the activity and they're staying the same, then they've got 6 months from that date to apply for a consent. Or if they're doing something that's entirely brand new or not the same as what they had been doing, then they would need that consent straight away. So it's different throughout the NS, and we're trying to communicate that information to people around that.
You had it.
And then in terms of farm plans, so different section of the Act, and while they're clearly referred to and there's some sort of fairly good guidance about what's going to be in the details of what's going to be required for the freshwater farm plans are still being worked on. So it's been led by MFE, MPI are involved, and then the regional sector are very much involved. So the time frame was 12 months. The ministers have heard from farmers and from the regional sector that they're very keen to get them up and running. And I think the last message that MFE gave us is that they've been asked to shorten that time frame from 6 to 9 months if they can, to get them and get the legislation in place sooner. But that, just noting, that's only the freshwater farm plan module that will be have specific requirements within the RMA. So the discussion that we've had as an organisation is what do we see as the future for farm plans broader than just freshwater, but certainly that opportunity to use the freshwater module in place of consents, I would hope will be there by listening to MFE at the moment. It's sort of by the end of next year. It should be there and should be available. I think that we're still waiting for a lot of detail in terms of what the process is going to be and what the actual requirements of our plan are. There's a number of plans around already that industry groups or catchment groups have developed. Some regional councils have their own versions. So the discussion at the moment is about not reinventing the wheel, but coming up with a consistent model using a lot of the best practice that's already around, that the farmers that have already invested are already doing a lot of these and can use a lot of the information they already have and just build that into a compliant freshwater farm plan.
So through the chair, so the words you used, like farm plans in place of consents, but nevertheless from a farmer's perspective, landowner's perspective, they need to get on with the consents because the underlying issues won't be changing, will they? The only thing that'll probably be changing will be how they administer it, and maybe some of the rationale behind it in terms of the other things that they may be doing to mitigate, that they take on, like, for example, water sampling, which may give us some extra dimensions and confidence, or so.
Yep, that's right.
Farmers need to be getting on with it.
The other thing is the consent will be prescriptive based on what they apply for, whereas a farm plan may give them more flexibility depending on what they need to do on farm in any particular year. So it just becomes a greater management tool for them than being locked into a consent they may be issued. But you're absolutely right. There will be a need for consents for a number of farms in advance of these farm plans. So we need to keep talking to them about that process as well.
Great. And my final question through the chairs, so how's it going from a resourcing perspective? There's a lot going on. The council's previously approved different, it's all tracking?
Do you want to talk about recruitment?
Yeah. So we're just in the middle of the recruitment process for those additional positions and looking at phasing them in based on our workload. The immediate spike has been in public inquiries, and I think that's noted in the report, and that's great. People are reaching out to us and wanting us to go on site visits. So we have a second person starting in my team on public inquiries and consent advice on the 9th of November. So that's our first hire, and that's great. And again, I'm very, very thankful for the support that has been provided from council for that process.
Well, thank you for all your work, both of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Kate?
Thank you. I get really nervous, and I raised this with you before, Rich, but I actually want to do it in front of the council and whether we can get some traction. When people are developing plans, and many people are well down doing that process, not having a standardised legend causes data people no end of issues, that you look at a plan and you don't know what colours water, what colours trees, forestry, culverts, things. And while the government are developing what the module B is, they could standardise the legend tomorrow, which allows people to start in that process of drawing their farm plans and now to a standard format. And I would really encourage us, and whether we can do it by motion, is ask that simple legend be standardised sooner and shared so that we know it, so that we can start drawing them today and working to that process. Drawing a farm plan is not a simple process.
You mean drawing the map, the plan has words?
No, the legend is the same. So when they did the templates for plans, for district plans, all residential zones in New Zealand are now one colour. They're saying within 2 years you have to have your district plans having the same colour for residential. It makes sense. Makes that whole readability so much easier. If all that came out sooner than later and within the next month, because it shouldn't be hard, is a standard set of what the plan legend would be, it means when we go and load them up into any data bank, we don't have to have a legend for every person's drawing or thing. It's just a simple...
Yeah.
You understand where I'm coming from because you've done the template stuff.
No, I do understand where you're coming from. I absolutely do understand where you're coming from. I just think the chances of that are really low. Just because from what I understand of how far things have progressed, they're not in the detail.
Yeah, I would probably support that. I mean, what we can do, Councillor, is we can certainly feed that through to the regional sector representative who's leading those discussions as a priority for us based on it. So that's I'm perfectly happy to do that. I would agree with Sarah that where they are in the process to get agreement on that, even that level of detail now, where there's some broader discussions about the next 6 to 9 months and some of the chunkier pieces of work may mean it's not feasible for them, but we can certainly raise it as something that would make a difference now.
It means that we can actually start on that journey. And for a plan change to just change the colours on a map is actually a really big thing. Having sat through the 2GP for Dunedin, that just to do that is actually quite a fundamentally difficult thing to do because all of your colours change. Anyone who's written red then has to change to green. You can't read the submissions and their understanding backwards. Just something like that. It should be looked at. Sorry.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. I have no idea what this discussion is about, and I'd like a little bit of background. Maybe I've missed something very significant. But colours on what? Maps on what?
Sorry, farm plan.
Sorry.
I think we probably run the risk of going down a bit of a
Okay,
Yeah.
an operational.
I certainly understand the message that's being given. The farm plan process is very different from a 2GP process in terms of it being a statutory plan, but I understand what you're saying around mandating the key to enable consistency across the country. So we're happy to take that message forward.
So they can be read.
Okay, is everyone happy with that? Michael, does that answer your question?
No, it doesn't answer at all.
I will sit down with you and show you what I mean.
Yeah. Are you happy for Kate to have a chat?
Yeah.
Can I?
Great. Now we have Miriam and then Hilary.
Thanks so
It was
much.
just about that.
Are you happy that?
Moved on.
I'm
Okay,
happy for
Hilary.
Just in the alternative to having them agree to it because they're not quite ready in their heads to agree to it, the first thing to do might be to see what the majority of people are currently using and get that out there, because if there's more people using it, then you've got a bit more confidence that if somebody's going to bring something in, if they've got half a brain, you'd think they would bring in whatever most people are using to make it simpler. So even finding out what most people are using would be a useful thing, if there is a most.
It's incredible. Yeah, it is happening.
The pieces of work that's happening is to bring together all of the different types of farm plans from industry groups, catchment groups, regional sector, and have a look at what's there. So, I mean, it's sort of the first stage in the process. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Marion.
Okay, in paragraph 28, thank you, you say to date there's been no clear vehicle for communication with resource management consultants and technical experts who are involved in the activities of the regulatory group. Whilst not yet implemented, the group is working on ways to better engage with this key group of professionals. I'd kind of like you to expand on this, because when I was in that position, I found greatest difficulty, and I used to wonder at when we got through the blessed plans going into before the Environment Court, we might have a way of talking with this particular group of people, some of whom were really disaffected, some of whom had been prior staff and were really disaffected. And I think there's a real problem in the relationship between ORC and that group.
Yeah. Yes, no, that's fine. So it is something that we have been thinking about, and at the moment and historically it's been on an application by application basis, and it's not just the consents team, but at least in my group that's how it has operated. So there's a couple of things we're looking at. So a regulatory group newsletter that puts out practice notes and establishes our thinking and being very clear about our position, which relates to some previous discussion that has been had around this table. And then also making sure that we have other opportunities to clearly speak with them, so having regular meetings and things like that. So yes, a little bit
improving.
Yes, absolutely. I guess from where I've been and previous experience at Environment South, and we had a consultants forum and things like that. So there's many ways you can do it, but yeah, we're getting there.
Great, thank you, Michael.
Yeah, I have no idea what's going to happen on Saturday night. None of us has a clear picture yet.
Is that the All Blacks test? It's more important than what happens Sunday afternoon, Michael. So just you relax Saturday night and get ready for Sunday.
But if one eventuality is that a new government will form, which will be centre right rather than centre left, and if that's the case, the action plan for healthy water is gone by lunchtime.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Now, I wonder what the position of ORC is in terms of coming to work on Monday morning with that possibility.
Yep.
How is Richard going to deploy his troops, rewrite his action plans? Have we thought about this?
Richard has his plan out, ready to go.
I'll have a go. So I guess my first response would be I'm not sure, Marion would probably know better than anyone, whether there is a mechanism to have it gone by Monday. I imagine that would take some time. And the messages we've heard is that while there are certainly details within the legislation that there is significant disagreement on, the fundamentals of it are actually agreed, and there will still be a lot of work within that new NES and the NPS that is consistent regardless of who's in government. So while we may have to adapt to some changes, I think that there is still a lot of work we will be required to do. And I think the other thing to say there is even our own planning vehicles in the new land and water plan are going to move into that space where they're not effects based, and we will have more direct regulatory work in terms of consenting and compliance than we've had in the past. So there will be that work to do, and there is already work under Plan Change 8, and there'll be more as we progress. So I think we will have to remain adaptable if there is a change, but I don't think that it will be throwing out all of the work that we've done.
Okay, thank you. And I think we'll be able to speak from a far more informed position next week rather than this week.
Maybe not, if the last one was anything to go by.
True. We are over time. So have we got any other critical discussion? Okay, we've got 2 recommendations.
Happy to move.
Report. Moved. Thank you from Kate. Seconded from Alexa. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. And we'll close the meeting. Thank you very much.